Imagine walking into your office excited about your new job, only to be greeted with suspicious glances and whispered comments. You try to shake it off, but day after day, the subtle jabs and exclusion wear you down. You're not alone. Sarah faced this reality every day, until one moment changed everything. Witness her transformation from a silenced victim to a powerful voice for change in her workplace. This is not just another story about racism. It's a blueprint for hope and action. Sarah's heels clicked against the polished floor as she entered the office, her smile fading as the familiar hush descended. At 28, she was the youngest manager in the company's history, her MBA and innovative ideas earning her a coveted position. Yet, 3 months in, the excitement of her promotion had given way to a daily struggle against an invisible current of prejudice. As she settled at her desk, Sarah couldn't help but notice the forced smiles and averted gazes of her colleagues. The microaggressions were subtle but persistent, like paper cuts that stung anew each day. When she spoke up in meetings, her ideas were often overlooked, only to be praised when repeated by her white counterparts. Invitations to after-work drinks mysteriously dried up, and water cooler conversations abruptly ceased when she approached. One particularly frustrating incident occurred during a team brainstorming session. Sarah proposed a marketing strategy that could potentially increase their client base by 30%. Instead of acknowledging her idea, her supervisor, Mark, simply nodded and moved on. 20 minutes later, when Tom, a white colleague, suggested the same strategy, Mark's eyes lit up. "Now that's innovative thinking," he exclaimed, patting Tom on the back. These daily indignities took their toll. Sarah found herself second-guessing her decisions, her confidence eroding like sand beneath waves. She began to feel isolated, trapped in a glass box where she could see everything but couldn't fully participate. The psychological impact of such workplace discrimination is well documented, with studies showing increased rates of anxiety, depression, and even physical health problems among those who experience it regularly. As weeks turned into months, Sarah's frustration grew. She oscillated between anger and self-doubt, questioning whether she truly belonged in this role. The internal conflict was exhausting. Should she speak up and risk being labeled as oversensitive or playing the race card, or should she stay silent and let the resentment fester? After a particularly trying day, where she overheard a colleague remarking that she was probably hired just to fill a quota, Sarah made a decision. She would keep her head down and focus solely on her work. If she could outperform everyone else, surely they'd have to acknowledge her worth. For weeks, Sarah arrived early and left late, pouring herself into projects and presentations. She produced stellar results, but the needle of acceptance barely moved. The isolation grew, and the silence in the office seemed to echo louder with each passing day. But fate had other plans. On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday, an incident occurred that would force Sarah to reconsider her approach. As she walked towards the break room, she overheard a conversation that would change everything. Little did she know, this moment would be the catalyst that transformed her from a silent sufferer to a powerful advocate for change. Sarah's hand hovered over the break room door handle as a familiar name caught her ear. In that instant, she faced a choice that would ripple through the entire company. The voices inside grew clearer as she hesitated, her heart pounding in her chest. Through the crack in the door, Sarah could see James, a fellow black colleague from accounting, standing near the coffee machine. His shoulders were hunched, his discomfort evident as he was cornered by 2 white coworkers, Mark and Tom. Mark's voice carried a mocking tone as he spoke. "Come on, James. You people are always so touchy. It was just a joke. Can't you take a little ribbing?" Tom chuckled, adding, "Yeah, man. Lighten up. You know we don't mean anything by it." James's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape. His voice was barely audible as he mumbled, "I'd appreciate it if you didn't make those kinds of comments." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. She'd been in James's position before, feeling cornered and powerless. The memory of her own experiences flooded back, along with the shame of staying silent. But now she was at a crossroads. Should she step in and risk becoming a target herself, or walk away and preserve the fragile peace she'd maintained? Her mind raced through the potential outcomes. Speaking up could make her a pariah, labeled as a troublemaker or oversensitive. It might even jeopardize her hard-earned position. On the other hand, staying silent meant being complicit in the very behavior she despised. The weight of her decision pressed down on her like a physical force. Sarah thought about the countless times she'd wished someone would stand up for her. She remembered the isolation, the feeling of being alone in a room full of people. In that moment, she realized that her silence had been a form of self-preservation, but it had also been a betrayal of her values. Taking a deep breath, Sarah straightened her back and pushed open the door. The conversation inside abruptly halted as all eyes turned to her. She could feel the tension in the room, thick enough to cut with a knife. "Mark, Tom," Sarah said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I couldn't help but overhear. What you're saying to James is not okay, it's not a joke, and it's not harmless ribbing. It's racist, and it needs to stop." The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's face flushed red with anger, while Tom looked away, suddenly finding the floor fascinating. James stood frozen, a mix of relief and fear playing across his features. Mark was the first to recover, his voice dripping with condescension. "Oh, come on, Sarah, don't be so dramatic. We were just having a bit of fun. You're making a big deal out of nothing." Sarah stood her ground, locking eyes with Mark. "No, I'm not. This kind of behavior creates a hostile work environment. It's unprofessional, it's hurtful, and it's against company policy. I'm asking you both to stop, and I'm willing to take this further if necessary." The tension in the room was palpable as Mark and Tom exchanged glances. Finally, Tom mumbled an apology and quickly left the break room. Mark lingered for a moment, his jaw clenched, before storming out without a word. As the door closed behind them, Sarah turned to James. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. James nodded, his voice shaky. "Thank you, Sarah. I didn't know what to do." Sarah gave him a small smile. "We have to look out for each other. This isn't over, though. We need to address this systematically." As they left the break room together, Sarah felt a mix of pride and apprehension. She had taken a stand, but she knew this was just the beginning. The ripples of her actions would soon turn into waves, and she had no idea where they would take her. In the corporate world, not all heroes wear capes. Some wear business attire and carry the weight of their convictions. But what happens when the system you're trying to change turns against you? Sarah was about to find out. The day after the confrontation in the break room, Sarah arrived at work to find an unusual tension in the air. Colleagues who normally greeted her with friendly smiles now averted their gaze or whispered to each other as she passed. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken accusations, and Sarah could feel the weight of judgmental stares on her back. As she settled into her morning routine, an email notification popped up on her computer screen. Her stomach dropped as she read the subject line, "Urgent meeting with HR, 10 a.m." Sarah's mind raced, trying to prepare for what was to come. At precisely 10 a.m., Sarah knocked on the HR manager's door. Inside, she found not only the HR manager but also her direct supervisor, both wearing grim expressions. The HR manager, a middle-aged woman named Karen, gestured for Sarah to take a seat. "Sarah, we've received some concerning reports about your behavior yesterday," Karen began, her tone cold and professional. "Several employees have come forward stating that you created a hostile work environment by accusing your colleagues of racism." Sarah's supervisor, John, leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "We take these allegations very seriously, Sarah. Your actions have caused significant disruption to team morale and productivity." As Sarah tried to explain the situation, she was met with dismissive nods and patronizing smiles. It became clear that they had already made up their minds. The conversation was less about understanding the truth and more about damage control. "We understand you may have had good intentions," Karen continued, "but making such serious accusations without proper evidence is not acceptable. We need to maintain a harmonious work environment." Sarah felt a growing sense of frustration and disbelief. She realized that in the eyes of management, she had become the problem rather than the solution. The very system she was trying to improve was now working to silence her. As the meeting concluded, John delivered the final blow. "We hope you understand the seriousness of this situation, Sarah. For now, we're issuing a formal warning. Any further incidents like this could result in more severe consequences." Walking back to her desk, Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger at the injustice, disappointment in her company's response, and a creeping fear about her future. She overheard snippets of conversation as she passed by groups of co-workers catching phrases like troublemaker and playing the race card. But as she sat down at her desk, something inside Sarah shifted. The fear and doubt began to give way to a steely determination. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about a systemic problem that needed to be addressed. With renewed purpose, Sarah opened her browser and began researching her company's diversity policies. She delved into employee handbooks, corporate mission statements, and public commitments to equality. The more she read, the more she realized the gap between what the company claimed to stand for and the reality she experienced every day. This fight was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Sarah knew she had a long road ahead, but she was ready to face whatever challenges came her way. The company might have tried to silence her, but they had only succeeded in igniting a fire that would not be easily extinguished. The company had tried to extinguish Sarah's fire, but they'd only fanned the flames. Now, as she looked around the office, she wondered, who else was silently burning with the desire for change? And more importantly, how could she convince them to step out of the shadows and into the light of justice? Sarah knew she couldn't take on this fight alone. The weight of challenging an entire corporate culture was too heavy for one person to bear. She decided to start with James, the colleague she had defended in the break room. One afternoon, she caught up with him in the parking lot after work. "James, I wanted to check in with you after what happened," Sarah said, her voice low. "How are you holding up?" James glanced around nervously before responding. "I'm okay, I guess. Thanks again for stepping in. But I'm worried about what might happen next." Sarah nodded, understanding his fear. "I feel the same way. That's why I wanted to talk to you. I think we need to do something about this. But we can't do it alone." Over the next few weeks, Sarah quietly reached out to other minority colleagues. She spoke with Amira from marketing, Carlos from IT, and Lena from human resources. Each conversation revealed a similar pattern of experiences: microaggressions, overlooked promotions, and a pervasive feeling of not belonging. However, Sarah's efforts to build a coalition were met with hesitation. Many of her colleagues, while sympathetic, were afraid of retaliation. They had families to support, mortgages to pay, and couldn't risk losing their jobs. "I get it, Sarah," Amira said during a hushed conversation by the copy machine, "but I've worked so hard to get where I am. I can't jeopardize that." Undeterred, Sarah continued her efforts to build trust and solidarity. She shared articles about successful workplace reforms and the power of collective action. She reminded her colleagues of the company's stated commitment to diversity and inclusion, pointing out the gap between words and actions. As days turned into weeks, Sarah noticed a shift. More colleagues were opening up to her, sharing their own stories of discrimination. The fear of speaking out was slowly being replaced by a growing anger at the injustice they had all experienced. Finally, Sarah decided it was time to bring everyone together. She organized a secret meeting after work at a nearby coffee shop. As she sat waiting, she wondered if anyone would show up. To her surprise and relief, one by one, her colleagues arrived. James, Amira, Carlos, Lena, and several others she had spoken to over the past weeks. The group huddled around a large table, speaking in hushed tones. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began. "I know we're all taking a risk by being here, but I believe that together, we can make a real change in our workplace." For the next 2 hours, they shared stories, brainstormed ideas, and discussed potential strategies. By the end of the meeting, a core group had agreed to support each other and work towards addressing the systemic racism in their company. As they left the coffee shop, there was a new energy among them. They had found strength in numbers and solidarity in shared experiences. Sarah felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. They had taken the first step, but the real challenge lay ahead. How would they turn this talk into action? As she walked to her car, Sarah began to formulate a plan that would shake the very foundations of their corporate culture. Have you ever tried to move a mountain? That's exactly what Sarah and her colleagues were about to attempt. As they gathered for their next clandestine meeting, the air crackled with a mix of determination and fear. They knew that challenging the status quo could cost them their careers, but the price of remaining silent had become too high to bear. What they didn't realize was that their actions were about to set in motion a chain of events that would reverberate far beyond the walls of their office. Sarah arrived early at the small community center they had chosen for their meeting. She arranged chairs in a circle, hoping to foster a sense of equality and openness. As her colleagues trickled in, she could see the weight of their shared burden in their eyes. James, Amira, Carlos, and Lena settled into their seats, joined by a handful of others who had recently joined their cause. "Thank you all for coming," Sarah began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "We're here to develop a strategy to address the systemic racism in our company. I know we all have different ideas, so let's start by sharing our thoughts." The discussion that followed was intense and, at times, heated. Carlos argued for an aggressive approach, suggesting they go straight to the media with their stories. "We need to make some noise," he insisted. "It's the only way they'll listen." Lena, drawing on her HR experience, advocated for a more cautious strategy. "We need to work within the system," she countered. "If we go too big too fast, we'll lose any chance of being taken seriously." As the debate raged on, Sarah noticed James sitting quietly, his brow furrowed in concentration. "James," she said gently, "what are your thoughts?" James cleared his throat. "I think we need to do both," he said. "We need to be strategic, but we also need to be bold. What if we gathered data on the discrimination we've faced and presented it to management with the understanding that we're prepared to go public if they don't take action?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Sarah felt a spark of excitement. This was the kind of innovative thinking they needed. Building on James's idea, Sarah proposed a bold plan. They would conduct an anonymous survey of minority employees, documenting instances of discrimination and their impact on job satisfaction and performance. They would compile this data into a comprehensive report, complete with recommendations for policy changes and diversity initiatives. "And here's the kicker," Sarah said, her eyes shining with determination. "We'll request a meeting with the executive board to present our findings. If they refuse or fail to take meaningful action, we'll be prepared to take our story to the media and relevant oversight organizations." The room fell silent as her colleagues absorbed the audacity of the plan. It was Amira who spoke first. "It's risky," she said slowly, "but it might just work. We're giving them a chance to do the right thing, but we're also showing that we're serious." After some discussion and a few modifications to address concerns about anonymity and potential backlash, the group agreed to move forward with Sarah's plan. They divided into teams, each responsible for different aspects of the strategy. As the meeting wound down, Sarah felt a mix of excitement and trepidation. They had taken a crucial step, but the real challenge lay ahead. She knew that the coming weeks would test their resolve and unity, like never before. Looking around at her colleagues, Sarah saw the same determination reflected in their eyes. They were no longer just co-workers. They were comrades in a fight for justice. As they left the community center, Sarah began mentally preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most important meeting of her career. The mountain they faced was steep, but together they were ready to climb. Sarah's heart raced as she stood before the company's leadership, her presentation folder clutched tightly in her hands. The boardroom was silent, filled with an almost palpable tension. Executives sat around the polished oak table, their faces a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that the next hour could change the course of her career and the lives of her colleagues. As she began her presentation, Sarah could feel the resistance from some of the board members. The CFO, a man in his late 50s, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a look of dismissal already forming on his face. "We've heard these concerns before," he interjected early on. "Our company has always been committed to diversity. I don't see what the issue is." But Sarah was prepared for this. She calmly pulled up a series of graphs and charts, meticulously compiled from their anonymous survey. "With all due respect, sir, the data tells a different story," she said, her voice steady. She walked them through the numbers, the disparity in promotions, the frequency of reported microaggressions, the impact on employee retention. As she spoke, Sarah could see a shift in some of the executives' expressions. The HR director leaned forward, her brow furrowed in concern. The COO, who had initially seemed disinterested, was now taking notes. Sarah then moved to the personal stories, carefully anonymized but powerfully told. She recounted instances of blatant discrimination, of talented employees who left due to a hostile work environment, of innovative ideas ignored because of the speaker's race or ethnicity. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as the weight of these experiences settled over them. Sensing the mood shift, Sarah transitioned to the business case for diversity and inclusion. She cited research showing that companies with diverse workforces outperformed their competitors by 35% and were 70% more likely to capture new markets. "This isn't just about doing the right thing," Sarah emphasized. "It's about the future success of our company." A heated debate erupted among the executives. The CFO argued that implementing new policies would be costly and disruptive. The marketing director countered, pointing out the potential for improved brand image and customer relations. The CEO, who had been silent until now, listened intently, his expression unreadable. As the discussion intensified, Sarah stood firm, addressing each concern with data and well-reasoned arguments. She could feel the momentum building, the tide of opinion slowly turning in her favor. Finally, after what felt like hours, the CEO raised his hand for silence. He looked directly at Sarah, his gaze piercing. "You've given us a lot to think about, Ms. Johnson," he said. "I can't deny the validity of your data or the power of these stories." He paused, and Sarah held her breath. "I'm authorizing the formation of a task force to address these issues. I want you to lead it." A wave of relief washed over Sarah. It wasn't everything she had hoped for, but it was a start, a crucial victory in what she knew would be a long battle. As she left the boardroom, Sarah felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had opened the door, but the real work was just beginning. The mountain hadn't moved, but they had taken the first step in climbing it. Sarah's appointment as leader of the diversity task force was met with a flurry of excitement and anticipation. She assembled a team of passionate individuals from various departments, each bringing unique perspectives and experiences to the table. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of brainstorming sessions, research, and planning. Sarah felt a surge of hope as she saw the genuine enthusiasm in her team's eyes. However, as they began to implement their first initiatives, they encountered unexpected resistance. Some longtime employees grumbled about unnecessary changes and political correctness gone too far. Sarah overheard whispers in the break room, questioning her qualifications and motives. Even some managers who had initially supported the task force began to push back when proposed changes threatened to disrupt their established routines. Undeterred, Sarah and her team pressed forward. They introduced mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees, revamped the hiring process to eliminate unconscious bias, and established mentorship programs for underrepresented groups. Each policy change was met with a mix of support and opposition, creating a tense atmosphere in the office. One particularly contentious issue arose when the task force proposed a new system for anonymous reporting of discrimination and harassment. Some department heads argued that it would lead to false accusations and undermine trust within teams. Sarah found herself in heated debates, armed with data and case studies showing the effectiveness of such systems in other companies. As weeks turned into months, Sarah began to feel the weight of the slow pace of change. She knew that cultural shifts take time, but the constant pushback was taking its toll. There were nights when she questioned whether she was making any real difference at all. Then came a crucial moment. The task force had drafted a comprehensive anti-discrimination policy, one that would fundamentally reshape the company's approach to diversity and inclusion. It needed approval from the board of directors to be implemented. Sarah spent weeks preparing for the presentation, knowing that this could be a turning point. The day of the vote arrived. Sarah stood before the board, her heart pounding as she made her case. She presented the policy, highlighting its potential to not only create a more equitable workplace, but also to improve the company's performance and reputation. As the board members asked questions and debated among themselves, Sarah could feel the tension in the room. When the final vote was tallied, Sarah held her breath. By a narrow margin, the policy passed. It wasn't a landslide victory, but it was enough. As she left the boardroom, Sarah felt a mix of relief and renewed determination. This was a significant milestone, but she knew the real work of implementation and cultural change was still ahead. That evening, as Sarah sat in her office reflecting on the journey so far, she realized how far they had come and how far they still had to go. The task force had made tangible progress, but changing hearts and minds would be an ongoing process. As she looked out at the city lights, Sarah took a deep breath, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in their quest for a truly inclusive workplace. As Sarah gazed at the city lights, little did she know that her efforts were about to spark a transformation far beyond what she had imagined. The next few months would reveal just how deep the roots of change can grow when given the chance to flourish. Walking into the office on a crisp Monday morning, Sarah immediately sensed a shift in the atmosphere. The usual tension that had once permeated the air seemed to have dissipated, replaced by a more relaxed and open environment. Colleagues from different departments chatted easily in the break room, their conversations no longer halting awkwardly when someone of a different background approached. In team meetings, Sarah noticed a marked difference in how ideas were received. Contributions from employees of all backgrounds were now given equal consideration, leading to more innovative solutions and a palpable sense of collaborative energy. The change wasn't just in the air, it was reflected in the company's performance metrics as well. However, not everyone embraced the new status quo with open arms. A small but vocal group of employees, mostly those who had long benefited from the old system, grumbled about reverse discrimination and lowered standards. Sarah knew these complaints were baseless, but she also recognized the importance of addressing them head-on to prevent resentment from festering. The impact of the task force's work became increasingly evident in the company's hiring and promotion practices. The HR department reported a 40% increase in applications from diverse candidates, attracted by the company's growing reputation as an inclusive workplace. Internal promotions now reflected a more equitable distribution across all demographics, with talented individuals who had previously been overlooked finally getting their chance to shine. Perhaps the most heartening changes were in the day-to-day interactions between colleagues. Microaggressions, once a common occurrence, had significantly decreased. When incidents did occur, they were now addressed promptly and effectively, thanks to the new reporting system and comprehensive training programs. As the months passed, the company began to see tangible benefits from its renewed commitment to diversity and inclusion. Employee satisfaction scores soared, and turnover rates dropped to an all-time low. In client meetings, the diverse perspectives within project teams led to more creative solutions, impressing clients and securing new contracts. Sarah's leadership throughout this transformation hadn't gone unnoticed. One afternoon, she was called into the CEO's office. With a mix of pride and humility, he informed her that she was being nominated for a senior leadership position within the company. The role would allow her to continue her advocacy work on a larger scale, shaping company-wide policies and culture. As she considered the offer, Sarah reflected on how far they had come and the work that still lay ahead. She knew that accepting this position would come with new challenges. But it also presented an opportunity to effect change at an even higher level. With a deep breath and a determined smile, Sarah accepted the role, pledging to continue pushing for progress and equality within the company and beyond. Word of Sarah's promotion and the company's transformation began to spread beyond their office walls. Other businesses in the industry took notice, reaching out to learn from their success. Sarah found herself invited to speak at conferences and symposiums, sharing her experiences and strategies for creating truly inclusive workplaces. As she stood on stages across the country, Sarah realized that her journey had become more than just a personal victory. It had become a beacon of hope and a roadmap for change in workplaces everywhere. Sarah's journey from a silent victim to a powerful advocate for change had been transformative, not just for her, but for the entire company. As she stood at the podium, addressing a crowd of eager listeners at a national conference on workplace equality, she realized how far she had come. Yet, Sarah knew that the fight against discrimination was far from over. The changes in her company were significant, but they required constant vigilance and reinforcement. Every day brought new challenges, reminders that the work of creating truly inclusive spaces never truly ends. Sarah's story had become a beacon of hope for many, but she was acutely aware that countless others still faced similar struggles in silence. As she concluded her speech, Sarah looked out at the sea of faces before her. The power to change our workplaces, our communities, and our world lies within each of us, she said, her voice steady and determined. It starts with one voice speaking up, one person refusing to accept injustice. I challenge you all to be that voice in your own environments. Stand up, speak out, and never underestimate the impact you can have. Together, we can create workplaces where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to reach their full potential.